So our next speaker is Father John Szada. And I think I mentioned this earlier, but for those who didn't know this, originally we were expecting Cardinal Ernest Simoni to speak. And maybe about 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, it was, recently, we found out due to unavoidable circumstances, he could not travel to the United States. So I was like, okay, here's a little curveball, but there's a reason. So we just prayed, Blessed Mother, you take over. Okay, who do you want? And lo and behold, started to hear this name, Father John Szada. Heard it like several times. And then I went, I think this is who the Blessed Mother wants. So someone gave me his phone number and we, got in touch with him. He was great. He got back quickly. And the more I learned about him, I said, oh my gosh, Blessed Mother, you gave us a great gift. So Father John Szada was ordained a priest for the Diocese of Harrisburg in 1978 by Joseph Daly. He has served as a pastor and chaplain in various assignments within the diocese. He holds a PhD in psychology from Capella University, a Master of Science in Psychology, a Master of Divinity from Mount St. Mary's College, a Bachelor of Science in Psychology from York College of Pennsylvania, and a Bachelor of Arts in Foreign Service and International Politics from Penn State University. So he's got a lot of awesome degrees there. Since 2011, Father Szada has been appointed as the official exorcist for the Diocese of Harrisburg. Father has emphasized the importance of ruling out mental illness before considering cases of possession. He is active in spiritual formation and pastoral care. His work has been featured in various media, news outlets, podcasts, and conferences. Father Szada recently spoke at the 15th International Gathering of the International Association of Exorcists in Rome, which was held September 15th to the 20th, 2025. Pope Leo XIV addressed a message to the approximately 300 exorcist priests who were in attendance at the conference. So we're very blessed to have him today. Welcome, Father John Szada.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray. And do thou, O Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, cast into hell Satan and all the evil spirits who prowl about the world seeking the ruin of souls. Amen. Our Lady of Sorrows, pray for us. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Most people don't realize it, but Our Lady of Sorrows is actually the patroness of exorcists. And so that's one of the reasons why I always invoke her whenever there is any opportunity to do so. And as we just heard, I do have a PhD in psychology, which is one of the reasons why I'm oftentimes asked to speak at various events, because I bring in both dimensions, the psychological and the spiritual. It's never an either-or situation. So many, very oftentimes you run into this, say, well, it's all psychological, it's all mental illness. And no, it isn't. It never is, because the human person is a person of body, soul, spirit. And anything that affects one level of our being has its effects on other levels as well. And so they go together. The key becomes to figure out which is the root cause and which is the symptoms. So you can have a person who has genuine mental illness, but demons will exploit that, use it, manipulate it. Or a person may have a genuine spiritual issue, but it will oftentimes manifest as mental illness to throw people off the track. And so what I want to do today is I want to focus in on some of the issues that are primarily of a psychological nature, but which manifest in terms of spiritual symptomology. But I think it's also important, going back, I was listening to some of Father Dan's talk, and one of the things he said was, there's a great battle coming that we're all going to be involved in. And I said to myself, no, the battle is already here. It's not coming. It's already right all around us. The tragedy is that most people don't even realize it. They're not even aware of the stuff that's going on. Maybe today I'll share some of those things with you. But let me begin, first of all, by talking about something which is called, in psychology, it's a certain area of psychological study, which is known as attachment theory. And attachment theory is very, very important, even spiritually, because it describes what happens with an infant in the very earliest years of a child's life in terms of their relationship to their caregivers, whether it be their parents or whoever else may be taking care of them. And depending upon the level of the relationship between the child and the caregiver, it can have a number of different psychological effects. For example, there could be what we call secure attachment, where a child feels very comfortable, very secure, very supportive, very loved, and therefore they can develop a very good, healthy, independent personality. There's another type of attachment called anxious attachment. And these are people who have essentially a negative view of themselves. And by the way, these symptoms don't just happen to little children. They remain part of us as we grow up. And they continue to influence the way we have relationships with other people. We'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. So with anxious attachment, people have this negative view of themselves and a positive view of others, which leads them to be very insecure. They're afraid of being abandoned, and they tend to be overly clingy. You probably all have encountered people like that, right? Then we have this avoidant attachment. These are people who have a positive view of themselves, but a negative view of others. They value independence, and they tend to suppress their emotions. They fear emotional closeness, and they pull away from partners. And then there is disorganized attachment. This style involves confusing and inconsistent behaviors in relationships as they swing between anxious and avoidance. It's often linked to a theory of a history of trauma or a negative caregiver who was the source of both comfort and fear. So again, if you look back on some of the relationships you may have had even in your own life, one of the really serious consequences of some of these negative attachment theories is the fact that it's a very serious impediment to being able to love. So first and foremost, remember the two great commandments. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, your whole soul, your whole mind, your whole strength. And you shall love your neighbor as you love yourself. Healthy self-love is the essential starting point of any genuine spirituality. If a person doesn't have a healthy self-love, it's impossible to love others. They'll fall into some of these traps. If they don't have a healthy self-love, it's impossible to love God. So no wonder then so many people's lives are so empty, why they have trouble relating to God. In fact, you hear it so very, very often, especially among women, who have a very difficult time relating to God as Father. They don't like that term, our Father. And if they went back into their history, they might discover that the source of that is the fact that they did not have a good relationship with their biological father, for whatever reasons. And so they can't relate. They can't project. They project their negative feelings onto God. But those are really only feelings that they actually had toward their biological father, one way or the other. And so it becomes impossible to love. And when those kinds of trauma are so prevalent in a person's life, boy, does that open the door for demonic influence. And so this is one of the things that is so seriously lacking in the culture within which we live today. We talk an awful lot about love. We use the word all the time. But we don't seem to know anymore what it genuinely means in terms of healthy relationships with ourselves and with others. So to rediscover love, to rediscover genuine love, is very, very vitally important. So there are some really negative things going on out there in the world, and we wonder why there is so much violence, so much hatred, so much anger that's out there in the world. It's because there's so much anxiety, so much fear, so much depression, which is so much a part of the culture within which we live. And it's our children who are the ones today who are being most seriously affected. For example, the big thing that overwhelms our children today is pornography. Do you know that the latest studies show that the average age in which a child first is exposed to pornography is 8. 8 years of age. And at that early age, their brain hasn't been wired completely yet. It's still maturing, and it's already being inundated by these images, and therefore causing all kinds of chemical reactions. And it's an addiction. They become addicted to it, just like any other drug or alcohol or any of those other kinds of things. This is where the demons really have a field day. Just to show what example I'm talking about. I'll give you 2 cases just over the last 2 days. Yesterday, I heard of a case, I was consulted on a case, of a child who is 6 years old. This 6-year-old child is already showing signs of demonic possession. How would a child of 6 become possessed? Turns out that her mother was a porn star, and she used to perform and act in the presence of her little child. The child was being exposed to it from the very beginning. And now the child's possessed because the child has been open to the negative influences of the demonic. I also belong to the Catholic Psychotherapy Association. On Thursday, we had a meeting, and one of the therapists was bringing up another case, in this case of an 8-year-old girl. And in this particular case, the child was conceived by rape. The mother wanted nothing to do with her, had no bond with her whatsoever. The child was passed around different people. There's marriages and divorces and remarriages, and the child is now showing signs of possession. It shouldn't surprise anybody. The mother was into the occult. The child has been very much a product of these kinds of attachment things that I've been talking about here. And this child is suffering. It's really a very sad situation, but more and more of our children are caught in those kinds of traps. They are being rejected. They don't know how to relate to others. Parents are having a very difficult time relating to their children. They're often other worlds. In fact, with so much of the electronic culture within which we live, young people as a whole don't know how to relate to other real people. All they know is the mass media, communication on the cell phone or the iPad or whatever it might happen to be. And so they don't know how to relate to others. So how is it then that we can even begin to turn it around? Well, one of the things that we really need to do, first of all, if we find ourselves suffering from so many of these different kinds of things, don't be afraid to get therapy. Seek out a counselor. Seek out a psychologist or a psychiatrist who might be able to help you in terms of, especially in terms of negative self-images. Very, very important. The second thing is the fact that I always often ask people, is there anything that you really like, anything that you really enjoy, anything that makes you happy? And inevitably, somebody will say something like, well, I love to play the piano, but, I just haven't had time for it. I just haven't done it very often, very long. And I say, well, you have to get back to it. What are those kinds of talents or gifts which God has given to you? They're important because it's no accident that we use those words, talents in the Bible story and talents in terms of our gifts. God gives these talents to us that we are supposed to nurture and nourish and cultivate for His honor and glory. But the side effect of that is the fact that it will also be a kind of thing that will help me to feel better about myself. It'll give me a sense of self-worth, a sense of healthy self-love. We need those kinds of things. It's good psychological practice, but also spiritually, of course. We need to be going to church. We need to be getting to the sacraments. And more and more and more these days, I get calls. I had just one the other day. A young couple called. They're having problems in their home. They're not Catholic. They went to their Methodist minister and asked for help, and the minister said, I'm afraid of that kind of stuff. Call the Catholics. They deal with that stuff. Hear it all the time. Call the Catholics. They deal with it, all right? But then, actually, I'm kind of limited because I can't tell them, go to confession. I can't tell them, go to communion. I can't tell them about going to Mass on Sunday. Or oftentimes it will happen, in fact, where somebody will call me and, I haven't been to church in this or that or whatever. Again, a couple calls me and they say they're having problems in their home. And so I said, okay, well, my girlfriend and I are, and I went, okay, well, there's a problem right off the bat. Where's your moral life? Living together without being married? You wonder why demons have an opening? You see, that's the one thing that we don't realize about demons. Demons are legalists. I oftentimes say that demons make either very good lawyers or very good Catholics. They play by the rules. They only can do what God allows them to do and nothing more, all right? But also, they can do what we give them the permission to do. We can do what we open the door for them to do. And people do it all the time. They play around with Ouija boards and tarot cards and Reiki and you name it, crystals. They're getting into all of these occult kinds of practices, and then they wonder why they are under attack. And the important thing is that this is happening all around us. And it's very frequently, it's funny, people say to me, well, Father, why did you decide to become an exorcist? I said, it was simple. The bishop came up to me one day and said, I want you to be my exorcist. That's how it happened. Literally, that's how it happened, all right? The bishop is the one who chooses the priest based on his own criteria to be his exorcist. So I've been the exorcist of the diocese now for 14 years. And I have seen a lot during the course of that time. The very, very first case that I had of a formal exorcism many years ago, where it was a young lady, Hispanic girl, about 18 at the time. And by the way, the family has given me absolute permission to discuss this, to share the story. And so I'll share it with you with their permission. So she was about 18 at the time, and she then was showing all kinds of signs of possession. And so they called me in, we investigated the case. Now, so what do you do if a person seems to be possessed? Well, the very first thing is to do, you take a history, just like if you're going to the doctor for the first time, all right? I have a 7-page intake form where we get a whole background, a whole history of where they're coming from, all right? And we see if there's any of those kinds of signs or other issues involved in there. That's the first thing we do. The second thing we do, especially if we suspect there may be a possession, is that we will send them for a mental health evaluation. All right? Give us some background in terms of their mental and physical health, so we see where they're coming from. And then we will do some prayers for them, some prayers of deliverance, maybe some prayers of healing, and to see if there's any kinds of reaction. Well, in this particular case, it was pretty sure that she was possessed. So we had the exorcism. By the way, a formal exorcism is a still relatively rare thing. And for every one, you have to get the permission of the bishop. So the bishop gave us permission. We had the exorcism. And the first time, it was easy, because it turned out that her father, so again, we're going into this attachment stuff. Her father was Cuban, her mother was Puerto Rican. The father was actually a practitioner of Santeria. It's a cult. It came from Africa, but it's in the Caribbean. And on the day of her birth, as we asked the demons, what gave you the legal right to be here? That's one of the questions we asked them. What gave you the legal right to be here? And the answer was, he gave her to us at her birth. And there were 3 demons present. We freed her immediately. Very easy, because it wasn't her fault. It wasn't her fault. And so the problem, though, was she didn't change. Because you see, again, a lot of people think of exorcism as terms of kind of like a magic ritual. Say the magic words, wave the magic wand, and they'll take care of the problem, and they go on with life as usual. Exorcism is a conversion process. There has to be a whole change. It's a spiritual dimension. She didn't change. She kept on doing things that shouldn't have been done, and she became repossessed. And just like the story of the Bible, the second time was much, much harder to free her than the first time. And when we really knew that she was possessed the second time, I got a phone call from the emergency room one day. The mother said she went into a seizure. They rushed her to the emergency room, and they said it took 4 big, strong policemen to hold her down, and they could barely do it. They gave her enough tranquilizers that should have taken down an elephant. Their description had no effect on her at all. They went out into the hall to try to think about what to do next. They came back into the room, and they found her literally climbing up the wall. Somebody said, "You mean like Spider-Man?" I said, "Yes, exactly like Spider-Man." All right? So it's pretty sure she's possessed, okay? So then what happens is we're working. It's really, really, really hard because she's having a tough time changing. And she decides that she can't take it anymore. She's going to give up. And this is one of the things that demons do. You see, they try to get you to commit suicide. Demons cannot actually kill you. They're not permitted to do that by God. But they will get a person so depressed that they just want to commit suicide. So in this case, she decided that's what she was going to do. Big tree in her backyard. So she goes to go outside to hang herself in the tree. As she's going out the door, she notices a statue of St. Michael the Archangel on the table. Something said to her, "Take that with you." So she did. Went out and put it on the ground next to the tree, put the noose around her neck. At that moment, her mother was walking by the window, looked out, saw what was happening, screamed bloody murder, as any mother would do. And just at that moment, a police officer was going by, heard the scream, came running in, and saved her life. That was what it took to turn her around, all right? when she realized that God was looking out for her, that St. Michael was protecting her. And so she has changed. And this is one of the reasons why they have asked me to feel free to share this story, that these real changes are necessary. But I think one of the things that's really, really important for all of us is to recognize the wounds and the hurts and the pains that are a part of our life that may go back to the earliest days of our childhood, things that we might hardly even realize, but they affect the way we interact with other people, and especially in terms of our spiritual life with God. If people think they're really having a hard time developing a personal relationship with God, maybe it has something to do with the fact that they didn't have a good personal relationship with their parents. Sometimes those things are interconnected, and there are things that probably need to be examined and looked at. So that was a case. I have another one, and again, I have gotten full permission to share this, and this is still ongoing. A very close friend of a family that I'm very close friends with, they have a son who is a lawyer down in Orlando. I have to fly down there this coming week. There was a case, he's a defense lawyer, was a case in which there was a death, initially described as a homicide. And the mother of the deceased was being charged with the murder. But there seemed to be some indication that there was occult or demonic or even possession involved in the case. So I was being asked to be an expert witness, since I have the background in both psychology and in exorcism. So I said, yes, I'd be happy to do that. Well, they put the whole thing on hold because at this point, they haven't been able to clearly identify the cause of death. So they're still working on that. So last week, I get a call from his mother telling me that he was rushed to the hospital with pancreatitis. Very, very seriously ill. He was in the intensive care unit. The doctors were examining everything. They said there are 8 possible causes of pancreatitis, when they had ruled out 6 of them. They weren't quite sure what had caused the problem. So eventually, they were able to treat him, and he suffered terribly for days. He was actually just released from the hospital yesterday. But I was on the phone with him yesterday, and he said to me, what had happened was the mother of this deceased had decided to have a memorial service for her child, her daughter. And every single person who had been invited to this service came down with some kind of sickness, illness, disease, something at the same time. When they went back to the person's home, they found a box in which there were photographs of every one of those individuals, including the lawyer, and attached to them were sigils. If you don't know what a sigil is, well, that's good, but be aware of that. I almost call a sigil a kind of like the reverse of a St. Benedict medal. St. Benedict medal, as we know, are protection against demons. Sigils are actually summoning spells to summon specific demons to cast certain spells. And all of these photographs had sigils with specific demons attached to them, attached to the photograph. And the only conclusion that the doctors could come to was the lawyer had been stung by a scorpion. Is that demonic or what? You just don't know. I have to fly down there on Thursday to meet with the family and to see some other things that are going on. And he said, please share the story, because these things are real. These are the spells that are being cast. These are the activities that demons are actually employing. When I was in Rome in September, and one of the speakers at the conference was talking about how young people today can get into AI and into the internet and actually create these sigils and create demons and cast spells through the internet against individuals whom they have something against. Yes, curses are real. And we need to know that. We need to protect ourselves against them, because those kinds of things are very, very real. This is why I said about a moment ago about the fact that, the battle is going on now. It's going on now. It's not something that's coming or will be. It's something that's already going on now. And so the issue that is, we have to be very, very vigilant. Again, I'll tell you a couple of stories in terms of cursed objects. Again, I had one case many years ago of a young woman who saw a ceramic doll on eBay, something that she was really, really taken with. And so she decided to buy this, which she did. It came, but from the very beginning, she had the feeling that something wasn't right. She just wasn't comfortable with it. Eventually, she sent it back, but she was already beginning to hear voices that were telling her a young man and an older woman, both of whom had already committed suicide at some time in the past, and they were inviting her to join them. And she resisted for the longest time. We tried getting her all kinds of mental health. She was on all kinds of medication, but she said it made her feel like a zombie, which it did. Whenever I met with her, she was like a different person. And eventually she said, I can't take it anymore. She stopped taking the medication, and she committed suicide. I got a very sad text message from her mother telling me that she had given up, she took an overdose, slit her wrists, drank some alcohol, and that was the end. See, that's what demons will try to do. They will try to get you to commit suicide because they can't kill you directly, although they like to attack us. There's no question about that. We also had to be aware of cursed objects. That was a ceramic doll, but I can tell you 3 stories I got all in the course of a week. So one day I get this call, and again, a good Catholic family, and this young family had a small recording studio which was attached to their home. And a man asked if he could rent the studio, and they said sure, and he used it, and then he left. After he left, they discovered that there was a small, like a teddy bear on a ring chain sitting on one of the speakers. And they thought it looked rather valuable, so they thought we better hold on to it. He'll come back for it. Well, he never did. So they threw it away. A few days later, they went back into the studio, and sure enough, it was still sitting there on the speaker. So they threw it away a second time. So now the family is moving to a new home which is actually across the street from her mother. And they're unpacking their boxes, and they found it again in one of their boxes. So now they really freak out, as you can imagine. And they said to the mother, what should we do? And the mother said, put it in the freezer. I went, huh? Put it in the freezer? So I said to the mother, why did you say that? She said, well, I just knew it had to be closed off someplace. I said, okay, I can understand your logic, but what happened was that particular refrigerator had one of those ice-making machines attached to it, but it had been disconnected because it wasn't working. Well, that night, a washer on the water hose disintegrated and flooded the house. So they called me in. They always, last resort, they call in the exorcist, right? They called me in, and I went, and the first thing we have to do is do an exorcism of the object. And then you have to destroy it. In this case, it would be burned. But you have to be very, very careful, because you can't allow any of the smoke to get into your face or into your eyes. And then it has to be disposed of. The ashes are disposed of someplace else. And so that's what happened, and everything was fine, thanks be to God. The next day, I get a phone call from a family that I know very well. And they had moved into a new home, and they found a voodoo doll in one of the crawl spaces of their new home. Well, in this case, again, good Catholic mother immediately panics and burns it. Bad, 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 all right? Because the smoke gets in the house, all the children get sick. She comes down with eye infections, which cannot be diagnosed, and no medication is helping. They call me. So I go and I have to do a minor exorcism of the home, prayers of healing and deliverance for all the children, and then some special prayers of healing for her eyes that had obviously been infected by the demonic smoke. The next day, everything cleared up. We need to be careful. We all need to be careful because we're all under attack. I'll come back to that in a couple of minutes. And then I get another call the next day. One of the permanent deacons from my diocese, his mother lived in New Jersey and she passed away. And they were bringing things from New Jersey, from her home to their home near Harrisburg. And included in on things were two, what were in essence pagan idols. I think they were art pieces, right? And two large, what they were calling temple etchings, which were from a temple, a Thai Buddhist temple in, I guess, Thailand. And so they had them in a pantry in their home. And the daughter went into the pantry the next day, and all of a sudden this big black snake came out from behind these pictures. And then suddenly they said it must have been at least 100 big black flies came flying up from behind the pictures into the house. So again, we had to go through the same thing. Get them out of the house. We had to exorcise them, destroy them, get rid of the ashes. But those things had been in the home. And as a result of which, they would begin to experience manifestations in the home itself. And so as a result of which, I had to go back and do a minor exorcism of the home in order to protect the family from the influences that had, all unwillingly, they were so innocent, they didn't realize that they were opening the door to the demonic by bringing these things into their home, all right? And it caused all kinds of problems for them. Thanks be to God, everything is well now, all right? But these are the kinds of things that happen, people acting so very innocently. We don't even realize what we're doing. We're opening the doors. There are so many portals. You know, demons know you so well. All right, don't forget, you know, demons don't take a break. They don't have to get some lunch. They don't take a nap. They don't go on vacation. They've been around since the beginning of time. And so there's a demon with you at every single moment. Just like you have a guardian angel at every single moment, you have a demon. You know the old cartoons of the demon on one shoulder and the angel on the other shoulder? Well, it's really true. Everybody has a demon along with their guardian angel, right? And those demons know you better than you know yourself. And so even though demons cannot read your mind, they're not permitted to do that, but they can tell by your attitudes, by your facial expressions, by your activity, what's going on inside. And they can use it against you. They can exploit you, all right? So that's what you have to be very, very careful of, all right? Be at least aware that we are all, always under attack. The first and foremost way in which, demons attack every single one of us is temptation. We're all tempted all the time because of our broken human nature, original sin. It's part and parcel of who we are, which is why it's so very, very important to stay close to Christ, to the church, to the sacraments. I just spoke at an adult education meeting the other night, and I asked the question, what is the single most powerful weapon that we have against the devil? And somebody who listened to some of my YouTube videos had the right answer. But most people don't get it. The single most important, powerful weapon we have against the devil is the sacrament of penance. Right? People think of communion, they think of the rosary, the scapular. No, the sacrament of penance is the single most powerful weapon that we have against the devil. First of all, the devil cannot know what you say in confession. It's covered under the seal of the sacrament, so he can't know it. So be honest, be open, spill your guts, tell the priest what's going on. Very, very important. And also a couple of other things in terms of going to confession, Go frequently, but not every day, Every 2 weeks, unless you have mortal sin, in which case get there immediately, all right? And for the love of heaven, don't go to communion in the state of mortal sin. Oh, they love that when you do that sort of stuff. And far too often that's happening, right? Don't do that. Get to confession, and then you can go to communion. But the other thing I run into so very frequently is when I'm hearing confessions on the other side of the screen, and I hear a piece of paper rumbling, and I said, do you have your sins written down on a paper? They said, yeah, I didn't want to forget anything. Don't ever do that. Very dangerous for two reasons. First of all, even if the demon doesn't know what you tell the priest, if you have him written down on a piece of paper and you walk out the door, he can look over your shoulder and read it. And don't think they don't do it, because they do. All right? Don't write them down. Second of all, the sacrament of penance is geared primarily for mortal sins. Right? So if you don't have any mortal sins to confess, 1 or 2 serious venial sins is all you need to confess. All right? Because you don't want to take a scattergun approach to the spiritual life. You want to grow spiritually. And you can only do that one step at a time, one day at a time. Pick the one fault or failing that is the most difficult for you and work on it. Do something about it. Take it away from the demon's activity. Always remember this, when, again, I get into trouble. Actually, some years ago, a man actually threatened to kill me over the sacrament of penance. And I say this because it happened out in the open. One of the things I always do when people come to confession, I don't ask them just, well, what did you do? The most important question to ask yourself is, why did you do it? Because if you don't ask yourself the question, why, you're going to run into that thing where people, well, I don't like to go to confession because I'm always confessing the same thing over and over and over again. Well, that's because you're never looking at the root causes. You're not getting down to what's the real reason why you're committing that sin. If you get to the root cause and figure that out and work on that, well, the sin takes care of itself. And only do 1 or 2 things at a time. Don't do more than one. This one particular man got very angry at me because every time he came to confession, it was exactly the same thing. And every time he said exactly the same thing, I gave him the same question. But why are you doing that? I don't care about that. I just want to come in here, tell you my sins, get absolution, and get out of here. So one day, we were rededicating my church, and the bishop was there. And in the auditorium, at the reception, after the dedication, with all these people around, this man came running in this crowd and went up to the bishop and said, "You better get that man out of here, or I swear I'm going to kill him." Said it in public, right? And I remember the phone call I got that night from the bishop. "Should I get you out of there?" I said, "Well, no, I think it's going to be all right." Obviously it was, because I'm still here, That was a long time ago. But that's the kind of thing that happens. We have to get down to the root causes. Because that's what the demons like to do. They like to pull the wool over our eyes so that we don't see, we don't hear, we don't really get to work on what needs to be worked on. Again, when I was talking about that, and these are all psychological things, believe it or not, the root causes of our hurt, our pain, our suffering, our sorrow, all right? Not just the actions, not just the symptoms. It's like I use the example, person goes to, the old saying, person calls the doctor and says, "I have a headache." And the doctor would say, "Take 2 aspirins and call me in the morning." You remember that old story? And I said, well, what happens if the headache is caused by tension? What happens if it's caused by a sinus infection? Or what happens if it's caused by a brain tumor? You have exactly the same symptom, but totally different causes. And until you come to grips with what causes the problem, you're not going to make progress. So it must be in terms of our own spiritual lives. Our spiritual lives have to be working on those things that cause those issues in our lives. And again, I'm going to suggest that you reflect upon what I was talking about in terms of attachment theory. Look back at your own relationship with your parents or caregivers when you were growing up and see if in any way it's actually affecting the relationship that you might have with your spouse or family members today as an adult. Because it probably does. You just don't realize it. You have to stop and think about it. You have to stop and reflect on it. You have to stop and pray about it. Now, there's another reason why demons will attack a person. So I said, not only is it possible for a demon, temptation, that's the first thing. But we also have other kinds of things. For example, I asked this question, are ghosts real? Are ghosts real? Yes, they are. Very much so, all right? However, there's two kinds of ghosts. We had a lot of fun with that at Halloween, right? There's two kinds of ghosts. There are ghosts that are actually souls in purgatory who are asking for help and prayer. And then there are demons who are pretending to be souls in purgatory. Now, how can you tell the difference? Actually, it is fairly easy, believe it or not. Because God doesn't allow communication with the dead. So if a soul in purgatory, by the grace of God, is asking for help, they are not engaging in conversation. If anything, the most they are asking for is prayer. Whereas demons immediately want to get your attention, want to get you to put your confidence in them, want you to pay attention to them. They will try to engage you in a conversation. And so that's one of the ways you can tell the difference between souls in purgatory and demons pretending to be souls in purgatory. So houses can be infested, places can be infested, and there can be many, many different reasons why that might happen, all right? We won't go into all of those today, but sometimes you have to look at what is going on, how is it manifesting, and that tells us how to handle the situation. So those are infestations. And then there are actually demonic attacks, where people actually can experience physical attack, all right? I had a couple of years ago, one of my colleagues, a psychologist, sent me a photograph. He said one of my clients woke up in the morning and they had this writing on their body, and they don't know how it happened, where it came from, or even what it means. And he took a picture of it and he said, "Can you tell me what this is?" And I looked at it and my jaw dropped because I recognized it immediately. And I said to him, yes, it was written in perfect ancient Greek, and the word was legion, which means legion. You know the story of the legion, of the demons, right? This poor woman, whoever it was infested by a legion of demons, right? So this is how sometimes they happen. They will actually scratches or writing or all kinds of things like that that can happen, but a person can experience those things. So that's kind of a demonic oppression. And there's demonic obsession, where a person's, their whole thoughts, their whole life just revolves around this demonic stuff. No, you don't want to do that either, You want to focus your attention on Christ, on the Lord, the Blessed Sacrament, the real presence. He's really and truly here, right before us, right among us. And we're going to be under attack. There's no way to help it. I mean, this is, remember Jesus actually says, it's very clearly in the scripture, Satan is the prince of this world. And we need to take that seriously. Satan is the prince of this world. And so he is going to do everything that he can to pull us into his kingdom. And so it's very, very important that we keep our thoughts, our focus of our attention on the Lord and not on all that demonic stuff. But it's going to happen. It's to be expected. What we need to be on guard. We are, in fact, involved in a tremendous spiritual warfare. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it, all right? There's another interesting story that I like to tell. Again, people don't realize this too. If you read the scriptures very, very carefully, the New Testament, the Gospels, one of the things that you find is that Satan attempts to kill Jesus 7 times. If you read the Gospels very carefully, all right? Of course, it starts right off the bat with, Herod and the slaughter of the innocents. And it has to do with then in the temple, when Satan in the desert, temptations in the desert, and Satan takes him up onto the temple. And you see again, there's where the suicide, he can't push him off, but he says, throw yourself down. He tries to convince Jesus to commit suicide. Because Satan doesn't know who Jesus is at this point, all right? There are 2 different times where people went to pick up stones to stone Jesus, all right, because they said he was blaspheming, that he was claiming to be God. Of course, there's one which he finally does succeed, and that is at the crucifixion. But there's another one that people don't often realize is an actual exorcism. But you remember, in fact, Father Rehill actually referred to it. Remember he talked about, Peter getting out of the boat and walking on the water, this great storm, the one story about the great storm, and the disciples are out in the boat, and they wake Jesus up. I always find that rather fascinating. There's this huge storm, they think they're going to drown, and Jesus is sound asleep. Come on now. Seriously? Something was going on here. Jesus was trying to teach them something. Going back to what Father said, trusting in the Lord, all right? And exactly what Jesus says to them. But he says, he stands up and he rebukes the wind and the waves, and all is calm. That word rebuke in Greek is an exorcism. There's another place, again, we don't realize it. Remember the story where Jesus goes into Simon's home and he finds Simon's mother-in-law sick with a fever. He takes her by the hand and he rebukes the fever. Same word in both cases. He rebukes the fever. It was a demonic fever, and he casts it out. And she gets up and waits on them. Can the devil do that? There's all kinds of ways that he can do that sort of thing to us. But we have to be very, very careful that we don't do anything that would open a portal, open the door, but would allow him to enter in, to take advantage of us. And if it happens we're not intentionally doing this, then we get to confession. We say our prayers. It's okay, so what are the things that we need to do in order to protect ourselves? Again, I said, the most powerful weapon we have against the demonic is the sacrament of penance. The next thing I would suggest is very important is the St. Benedict medal, all right? St. Benedict medals are very, very powerful. However, and even unfortunately, a lot of our priests don't realize this, the St. Benedict medal is the only medal that isn't just blessed. It has to be exorcised first before it is blessed. And any priest can do it. It doesn't have to just be the exorcist. Any priest has the power and authority to exorcise and bless that medal, all right? So that would be one thing, make sure that, because I've had people call me or email me or text me, I went to my priest and he just did a blessing. I said, no. And I actually had to send the text to him and say, no, this is the ritual you have to follow to do a St. Benedict medal, all right? The other one would be then, of course, the brown scapular. And again, it's a funny sort of thing. People will come up to me sometimes, Father, will you bless my scapular for me? And I say no, and they get shocked, Why? The brown scapular, again, is among those things. It's the only scapular that is not blessed. The person has to be enrolled in the scapular. That's the important thing. I remember as a child, that used to happen on the day that we went to confession for the first time before we received First Holy Communion. When I was a pastor, that's what I always did with my children. On that day they received First Penance, I enrolled them all in the brown scapular, all right? And I was the chaplain to the monastery, the Carmelite nuns in Elysburg for 10 years before they moved to Fairfield, Pennsylvania. And even there, for example, when a nun is clothed, when she receives the habit for the first time, the habit is blessed, she is blessed, and then that's it. If her habit wears out or her scapular wears out, just get rid of it and get a new one, all right? It doesn't have to be blessed because it's the person who is blessed, the person who is enrolled, not the scapular that's blessed, right? So make sure that you have been enrolled in the brown scapular because it's a very, very powerful and important tool against the devil. And the other thing is the frequent use of holy water, all right? And again, sad to say, I know fortunately in my diocese, because my bishop and all of them have learned from the things that I have done over the years, holy water has to be blessed in a very special way, all right? Going back to what I said before, Satan is the prince of this world. And so as a result of which, everything in the old rituals, and by the way, I celebrate Mass liturgy in 4 different rituals, all right? Where I am is at an oratory where we celebrate the traditional Latin Mass, but I also celebrate the Novus Ordo Mass on a regular basis at different places, but I also have Byzantine faculties, so I celebrate in both the Ruthenian and the Ukrainian churches where I'm needed, all right? So I go back and forth all over the place, and I always used to joke and say, whenever I go in one of these other churches, I always have an index card with me that has the name of the bishop on it, so I get the right bishop in the right church. That's important, all right? Really important. So anyway, when we get to those sorts of things, it's important to realize the fact that in terms of blessing of holy water, many of our priests don't realize the fact that since Satan is the prince of this world, in the old rituals, you don't just simply bless water. First, you have to do an exorcism of the salt, then a blessing of the salt. You're taking the salt out of the kingdom of Satan and bringing it into the kingdom of God. Then you do an exorcism of the water, and then you bless the water. Again, taking it out of the kingdom of Satan, bringing it into the kingdom of God. Then you have a prayer of commingling, where you pour the salt into the water, and then you bless the new creation of water and salt. It's quite a ritual, all right? Now, I say that how important it is because one day I was interviewing a lady, and this particular lady, we weren't sure if she was possessed or not. We were interviewing her. So at the end, I blessed her with the holy water, and she jumped. And she said, "What was that? What did you do? That stung." I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "I've been blessed with holy water lots of times, but there was something different about that. What was it?" She felt the salt. It actually affected her. She had no idea, but it affected her. And so you have to make sure, be very kind and gentle with your priests, loving them, but try to get them to do the right ritual so that it has the full effect, the full power that it is intended to have. And so those are some of the things that are very, very important. And we should use those at our homes all the time. And also by blessed candles and blessed oil, olive oil. And again, any priest can bless those. They don't need to be done by an exorcist. All of those things are very, very good and very important. Keep blessed candles in your home and oil that you can put around the doorposts and so forth. Have your home blessed. I hate to do this with our priests, especially with the so few priests there are, but your home should be blessed at least once a year. At least once a year. And people say to me, "Well, why? Why do you have to bless? It's been like 3 years. Why do I have to have a bless?" I said, "Stop and think of how many sins you committed in the course of the year in that house. Now you know why it has to be blessed, all right?" So a house should be, and so we have these special blessings of Epiphany. At Easter time, there are special times when homes can be blessed, all right? So going back now in terms of a person who may be possessed, how can we tell if a person is possessed? I started off by saying, well, first we interview them, we get a psychological evaluation, we get a mental history, but there are certain signs that a priest can look for, and these are found in the Roman ritual, that a priest would look for in terms of whether a person would be authentically possessed, all right? One of the first is, and I already kind of referred to it in a sense, there's an aversion to sacred objects, those reactions to holy water, all right, for example. There's another one which is really important, and that is the ability to know things that the person would not have ordinary knowledge of. So for example, that 8-year-old girl that I was talking about earlier, one of the things that they've discovered about her is the fact that she's living with her grandparents, and her grandmother would say, she's missing something, there's something she can't find, and the little girl would tell her exactly where it is, even though she has no idea. The little girl has knowledge of those things and should have no idea where it is, but she does. The other thing we had was a case one time of a woman who we were interviewing her, and it was in a church. And I told her the only way she would ever come into the church was when I told her, you will come into the church and I will interview her. So I was sitting in the pew. She was in the pew behind me. And behind her were two of my team members, a doctor and a nurse at this particular point, two women. And so without saying anything, the woman who was the doctor behind her, so I have the whole team that works with me. The woman who was behind her, the doctor had a woman's bag. It wasn't a purse, just a bag, in which she had a first-class relic. And she just gently leaned forward and placed this bag against the back of the pew on which the woman was sitting. And the woman screamed, flew up in the air, and flew down into the aisle. What was that? What did you do? What did you hit me with? She had no idea. But she reacted to something that she didn't know, and she reacted to the presence of the sacred, even though she didn't know that it was there. All right? So that's one of the things that we can look for. Another one is the ability to know or speak in languages that the person has never known or been exposed to. So sometimes in a case, what we'll do is actually ask a demon a question in a different language, especially in Latin these days. You know, who knows Latin anymore? Right? But demons do. And so, you know, if you ask a demon questions in Latin and they can answer you exactly and correctly, pretty good idea that this person is possessed. So aversion to the sacred, the ability to know things that they should not know, but also goes back to, remember that one I talked about, the girl climbing up the wall? You know, the ability to show supernatural or inhuman strength or abilities that don't make any sense, all right? So all of those things are things that we look for. Now, they're not always present. Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. But those are pretty good indications that a person may be possessed. So I want to kind of, you know, begin to wrap this up. And I think the single most important thing for all of us, from both a spiritual and a psychological point of view, is that we have to learn once more how to love. Pure and simple. Realize the fact that love is not a feeling, love is not an emotion, love is not an attraction. Before anything else, love is a choice, all right? A choice to put the good of the other first. A choice to will the good of the other. And the only way that a person can really do that is to be able to feel good about themselves. You know, the old saying, you know, you can't give what you do not have. And if you don't have a really healthy self-love, it's very, very difficult to have genuine love, because what we call love oftentimes today has more to do with the fact that I get something out of it. What that other person does for me, either physically or psychologically or emotionally, I get something out of it. I'm looking for a return. And that's what we tend to call love. And the world, again, within which we live knows only loneliness, pain, suffering, anxiety, violence, especially our young people. The leading cause of death among adolescents today is suicide. Suicide. It shows that they're growing up in a world without hope. We have to be people of hope. We have to be people of faith. We have to be people who truly live that hope, that faith, and that love, the great theological virtues. Because, of course, it all goes back to this. The greatest act of love is the Eucharist itself, the sacrifice of Christ's death on the cross made truly real and present here on this altar. Self-sacrifice. But again, you cannot give what you do not have. So really strive again for whatever healing that you need in whatever way that it needs to be done, spiritually, psychologically, and I know this is very difficult, but it is very, very helpful to have a spiritual director, somebody that you can see on a regular basis about your spiritual life. And please learn to obey what it is that he tries to lead you to, and to grow more and more, especially in those virtues. So I hope I've shared some things with you that are helpful. And again, going back to what Father Dan said, the battle isn't coming, it's already here, it's already now, and I think you can see that already from the things that I just shared with you all. So I ask you please to keep me in prayer, and because as I said, I'll be on the plane to Florida on Thursday to deal with this other case, but the cases come to me every day, 2, 3, 4, 5 times a day from all over the world. Unfortunately, too many of our bishops don't believe in it. Seriously. Too many of our priests just brush it off because they're too afraid of it. That's one thing we can never, ever do. I always say, don't ever, ever be afraid of the devil, because that's what he wants. He feeds on your fear. Respect him, but never fear him. Always learn to live and love and grow in our Lord Jesus Christ. Thank you. And before I go, I ask you 2 things. First of all, I have a long trip home, so please say a prayer for me for a safe journey home. It's about a 3.5-hour drive from here. And before I go, let me give you a blessing. Dominus vobiscum, benedictio Deum potentis, Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti, descendat super vos, et maneat semper. Amen. God bless you all.